This will be the third of 3 videos that demonstrate how to use LINQ to entities to select data from our sample database. Now, as we began this little mini series of 3 videos, I said that what we were really doing was querying entity objects. We're not querying the database per se. There is a subtle difference here in so much that we allow LINQ to entities and the entity framework to compose the TransX SQL to execute against our physical SQL Server database, as opposed to going against that physical database, because the tables and the entity model might be different. They're brought together through that mapping layer. So we're really working with the entities, and we're not really concerned with the table structure that's supporting those entities. Just want to make that distinction one more time. Okay, well, up to this point, we've been retrieving entity sets, sequences of instances of our entity objects. But now what I want to talk about is retrieving a single instance instead of retrieving a collection or a set of instances of our entities. And so that's what we're going to do in this video. And in the process, we'll talk about a few other things as well. So what we want to do, single item. We're also going to talk about ordering and where clause. And we've talked about this already in our discussions about LINQ, but I just want to show it in the context of working with LINQ to entities. So here's the problem. We want to work with a single customer from our database. So we go var customer equals, and then from C in de.customers, select C. And we might even say, hey, I want to only work with the customer where C dot last name is equal to Jaworski, or C dot, let's see if I have a customer ID. Customer ID equals, I think maybe 2. We should have a 2 in there. So I know I'm going to only retrieve one value, especially if I write this query with the where clause, like I've written it right here. But when I look at this in IntelliSense at least, and click the operator to get into IntelliSense, I would expect to only be working with one item, but I'm not. I'm still working with a sequence of items as far as .NET is concerned. Why? Because it always pulls back a sequence of items. If we want to work with a single item, we're going to have to take a few extra steps. There's a couple of ways to do this. If I already have a sequence, I can simply call first to grab just one item, or last to select just the last item in the sequence, or what I prefer to do right up front, so that from this point on, since I'm using this var statement, I'm only working with a single instance of my entity. I wrap the LINQ query in a pair of parentheses, an opening close parentheses, and then I'm going to call first. So now, whenever I go console.writeLine and I work with the customer, I hit the dot, now I can get to the properties of just a single instance of my entity, customer. And in this case, I can type it, I can print out the last name. So let's go ahead and just run this really quick. Okay, very good. So we were able to get just to the customer with the ID equals 2. We're working with a single instance, not a collection, not a sequence. Okay, so I inadvertently talked about the where clause. There are some other options here as well. I can just do order by, and then C dot last name, and I think we're going to get the same result, only because we have a very small database of just 2 customers. So that's how we would use the where clause, how we use the order by. How would we do similar kinds of things using the method syntax? Very similar. So var customer equals de.customers dot, let's first of all go with the where. Given C, give me back where the C dot customer ID is equal to 2. Dot first. Let's run it. Okay. And let me comment that out. And do the same line, but use order by instead. So var customer equals de.customers dot order by, given C, order by last name dot first. Okay, let's run it again. Okay. Now, let me go off in a slightly different tangent here, and I guess I'll just pick on the LINQ query syntax. Let's go var customer equals from C and de.customers, where c.state is equal to Illinois, select C, and then I'm going to wrap that with a first. Now this will work, but I'm leading up to something I know will not work. Great, we're still working with Jaworski. Now let's do this. I'm going to change from Illinois because I know that there is no customer from the state of Alabama, and I'm going to run our application. We're going to get an exception. Why? Because the sequence contains no elements. So when we try to call the first method, chaining it up there at the end, it's going to say, okay, I get to work against a sequence of items, and I'm going to pull the first one from the sequence. What? There's no sequence. The sequence is empty. So what do you do in a case like this? You still want to work with just one item, but it's possible that there's not one item to work with. How do you handle this? Well, the way you can do that is through another method called first or default. So give me back the first item in the sequence. If there's nothing in the sequence, then give me the default value for that type. And in this case, our type will be a custom class of type customer. And so the default for that will be null. Let's run the application now. We're still going to get an exception, as we do, null reference exception, but that's okay because I can handle a null reference exception fairly easily. All I got to do is just wrap an if around it. So if customer is not null, then go ahead and write out his last name. I could do an else statement, but I don't know if I'd prove a whole lot. So as you can see, it's not doing anything, but at least we didn't get an exception. So I prefer first or default because if the sequence is empty, I can handle that. We just have to remember that the sequence can be empty, and we need to account for that. Okay, so to kind of do the same thing using just the method syntax, I'm going to go var customer equals de.customers dot first or default. Now you might say, okay, so you're just pulling the first one back and you're not going to use a where clause. Well, yes and no. If you take a look at the third overload, you can put a predicate inside of the call to first or default. So instead of doing dot where and then passing in, c dot state equals Illinois dot first or default, instead of doing all that, I can just pull out this part, the predicate part, get rid of delete or where altogether, and then just paste that in there, and we'll get the same results. Let's go ahead and try it. Great. Okay, so I think that's enough with selecting. Let's move on to update, insert, and delete in the next video. We'll see you there. Thank you.